Hello there, everybody. Welcome to this live recording of the Expedition to Soul podcast. This is how we are bringing the podcast out to you now every single week through a live recording that you can find the replay of and all of the usual video places, and also on our podcast player, whatever player you use. And we do have guest interviews that are still coming out. Last week, we had a great interview with our friend Nicole of Arcane Astrology, so be sure to check that out. Now, again, this is the live recording of the Expedition to Soul podcast. I'm Sarah, founder of the Sisters Enchanted. And because this is live, I feel like I should give you a little bit of warnings for today of this recording. I am away. If you're watching this live, you can probably see I am away from home. And the lovely Christina, who is our student support sorceress here at the Sisters Enchanted, is actually hosting this on a technical level in case my Wi-Fi drops. If that happens, Christina will pop on until I can come back. We are here today, though, to talk about communication and communicating your needs, your desires, and your wants from people in your, to people in your life. Now, why are we talking about this? We are talking about this because it is one of the number one things that we hear from people is like, how do I tell somebody in my life that I am not happy? Or how do I explain to somebody in my life that I need them to move on from doing this thing? Or how do I set this boundary? We most recently heard this. We're enrolling for our Inner Circle membership, which is our upper tier membership. And the question was, how do I talk to my partner or my spouse about this? So whether it's communicating your daily needs around just needing somebody to put the freaking dishes away, or it's something big like spending money on yourself, or it's explaining to a loved one that you really like, you love them and you also need them to stop talking to you so much. And you also need them to stop asking for things, right? Maybe for some of you, it might be that you really want to learn to read tarot, or you're feeling a call to like this whole world of spirituality, but you don't know how to communicate that to people in your life. This is a whole spectrum of communication, and that's what we are going to talk about today. So hello, everybody watching live and on the replay. I will say that if you are a person listening to this on the podcast later on a podcast player, remember a really cool thing about podcasts is that you can create your own playlists. So if this is an episode that you feel like you want to listen to again during times of tough communication, be sure to save it to a playlist and any other episodes of ours that might help you out. So you always have this little pick-me-up and go-to place to listen to some empowering information whenever you need it. All right, communication. So what is communication? Let's start with that question. We know that we want to communicate to people what we need, what we want, what we desire. You know that, I know that, but let's really think about what communication is. And because this is the Sisters Enchanted, we're going to look at it from an energetic level, and we're going to look at communication in regard to the rhythm of the elements and how this can empower us to communicate in maybe a different way, or communicate the really tough stuff, or communicate when we feel like we've been communicating, but no one's listening. It doesn't seem like it's sticking or resonating. So firstly, when we think of communication on an energetic level, we can look at the 7 energy centers. Now, when we talk about the 7 energy centers, as we do in our Holistic Witchery program, we're talking about the westernized version of the chakra centers. And because there's so much westernized information in here, we refer to them as the energy centers. Now, your throat energy center is the heart of communication. And it's communication, not just what you're saying, but also what you're hearing, how you are listening to other people. The thing about the energy centers is that they work as a system. So in terms of a system, we want to look at what comes before, what's feeding into your throat energy center, your communication center, and that is your heart center. This is where unconditional love for yourself and others and the whole world at large comes from. Well, what's before the heart? That's your solar plexus, and this is where your strength, your perseverance, your grit, your tenacity. It's where your confidence in yourself, this is where this is coming from. So if we look at your throat energy center, down to your heart, down to your solar plexus, which is right under your sternum, this core like center of your energy system, if we're looking at that, we can learn a lot about communication. And we can learn a lot about how we communicate and what it takes to effectively communicate. So at your heart is unconditional love. If we're communicating from a place of like reaction, like heavy emotions, maybe really aggressive or maybe really passive, like sort of not directly saying what it is that you want, this can come from not really unconditionally loving yourself and really understanding your worth as a human and valuing your needs. Well, what's feeding into that? Your perseverance, your strength, your confidence in knowing what it is that you need and why. And that's coming from below your heart center. So this is like a communication zone. Rather than just looking at your throat energy and thinking, I need to speak more or I need to listen more. Well, how is your unconditional love for you feeding into that? How is your unconditional love for the person who might not be listening to you or who might not be like hearing what you're saying because they have their own shadow work that they've not gone through yet, or they're like reflecting back on you, their feelings rather than hearing yours? Where is your unconditional love for that? And where is the confidence in yourself to know that you're worthy, you're valuable, what you're saying matters, and that you don't need somebody else's approval? And this is this whole zone of energy. It's like the very core, the center of the energy centers. It's the middle three here. And if we look at just this rotating space, we can learn a lot about communicating and communication in general and how to communicate our needs to other people, because it's more than just what you're saying. It's your belief in your worthiness. It's the emotion that you're bringing to the table when you're talking to people. And working on your energy centers is an amazing way to start working on your communication, because what you're doing is understanding, well, maybe I said that, I want to learn tarot and some family members like laughed at me and now I don't really know what to say to them. Or maybe I told everybody 10 times to take their shoes off when they walk in the house. Now, that's not something I would say, because I don't have a problem with shoes in the house, but a lot of people do. And if Anna's here in the comments, Anna has a problem with shoes in her house. So if you maybe tell people constantly, take your damn shoes off at the door, and they just aren't doing it, or like put the thing away, there's a spot for it, and they just aren't doing it. I think it comes to understanding your emotional connection to the thing you're communicating, and then how that's playing into your heart, how that's playing into your solar plexus. Because we want to think about, again, really truthful communication and communicating in a way where you know what you're saying is relevant, where you are holding it from this place of, I'm worthy of having this thing that I'm requesting because I am human and I'm worthy of my desires. That will lead to assertive communication as opposed to emotionally reactive communication, maybe passive communication, maybe aggressive communication, maybe shutting down entirely. So we can look at this as our energy centers when we're communicating to communicate more effectively. And that is this inner work that we're doing to live the life we want to live, looking at the stories of our energy centers and how we are growing in that way, how we're expanding in that energy, as opposed to contracting, getting smaller, getting more frustrated and irate. Believe me, I've been there too. And really looking at those stories. Now, another way that we can look at communication in our magical spiritual world that we live in is through tarot. Naturally, we're going to bring some tarot into this conversation. And I see Anna in the comments here saying, it's me, I'm Anna, no shoes, please. Anna sent me this GIF yesterday of the movie Step Brothers with Will Ferrell's in it. And it was saying that this house is a prison because you can't have snacks while dinner's being made. And I always tease Anna about her house being a prison because I can't wear shoes in her house. I can't muck up this or that. We can't go in this person's room. we need to blah, 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 blah. So I was teasing her about that. But it's interesting how we all have different values, right? Anyway, let's get on to our tarot part here. Now, in tarot, the suit of swords is really a story of communication, and it's a story of your internal communication. So, when we want to communicate our desires to other people effectively, we've got to consider how we're communicating to ourselves. So, if we walk into a conversation like prepared for battle and saying, I'm going to have to fight for this, I just know it, as opposed to that energy of whatever happens here is a learning lesson. Whatever happens here is an outcome. That's all. It's an outcome, and a decision will have to be made based on that outcome. Our thoughts are the things that really hold us back from communicating super effectively with ourselves and with other people because we're worried about what's going to happen. I presented this question to somebody recently and I said, well, what's really the worst that could happen? You know, this person in particular is married, has a husband, and I gave an example in my own life. You know, when I do things that my husband might not appreciate, and I always ask, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Is he gonna leave me? And then I say, you know, if that were to happen, that begs the question: if he doesn't love me for who I am, should I be with him to begin with? And that's a tough question to answer. But I think that when you can look at your own thoughts, your communication gets better because you realize what's true and what's not. So with the suit of swords, we are thinking about internal communication. I just noticed on camera, I had a finger injury and I'm going to try to hide it. It's not very pleasant to look at. The suit of swords is your internal communication. Now, the card that I'm showing on camera, if you're listening to this later on the audio version, is the Eight of Swords as an example. The entire swords suit can feel very cumbersome. It's like swords going through a heart, right? And it's like a bleeding heart, and there's there's death, and there's like stealing of swords and trying to hold on to things for dear life. And of course it ends with the Ten of Swords, which is all these swords in someone's back, like they've been stabbed in the back and just died a painful death. But really, these are what we're bringing onto ourselves based on our thoughts and where we need to rethink things. Now, the Eight of Swords depicts a person in a cage of swords, 8 swords around them. And this person is blindfolded. And they're wrapped up with some like ribbon or rope or something like that. But when you look very closely, you see that the wrappings around them are actually loose. So all the person has to do is give a little shimmy and they're going to unwrap themselves. Then they can take off their blindfold and they can see they're not actually in a cage because the cage isn't closed. They can walk right out of it. And this is what we do with communication. I think we put ourselves into this cage feeling like I can't communicate my needs because nobody is listening to me, because they won't respect what I have to say. There's years of evidence that they won't listen to me. There's years of evidence that they won't respect, or they'll just laugh at me or mock me or something. And this is where communication goes back to the stories you're telling yourself. And we can find those stories in our energy centers also and start to reconsider them, rewrite them, and really take our power back. Because when we feel like we're caged in, we don't have any ways out, we're not getting our needs met, we don't know how to communicate them, there is always a way out. It might not be very easy. I'm not here to say it's easy, but it begins with the thoughts you're having for yourself. So working on your energy centers, and then the suit of swords in tarot, looking at that suit from Ace through 10 and reconsidering what those cards mean in terms of internal thought is a really great way to start considering your communication style and how you might be communicating to yourself before you even communicate to others. Right? How you even communicate to others. And it's about this confidence again in yourself. It's about knowing what's actually true in a moment versus what feels true. It can feel true that there's no option. It can feel true that no one's going to listen to you. It can feel true that everything's overwhelming. And that doesn't mean that it's not true. But what can also be true is that you do have agency and you can make a different decision. And the results of that decision, though, might be uncomfortable when you start communicating your needs clearly and standing to them when maybe you haven't before. Now, I've seen that in my own life with young kids. My kids are 5 and 8. And I will say the first few years of their lives, I was very much like, I must do everything. I must do everything for everyone. My husband, it's too much for him. So I need to overcompensate. And the transition from that to where I am now, and I just say, this is what I'm doing, you're going to be fine, was not easy because at first my husband, really because of my thoughts, I had essentially, I don't want to use the word train, but I'll kind of use that word for lack of a better one. I had like trained him to rely on me, right? Because I was thinking it's just easier for me. It's easier than having the conflict over him feeling overwhelmed and having to like do these things on his own. It's just better this way. It's too much for him. I can do it. And the transition from that to you're going to be fine, you're grown up, was not easy, but it's a choice, right? It's another decision. And then like changing the way you communicate to yourself and the way that you think. So this energy of communicating is actually a very spring-like energy. Right now in the seasons, we're in a shadow work type energy. And in about a month, 3 weeks or so, we're going to move into this energy of dreaming anew and resetting. Now, that season, the autumn season, when we look at the elements, that's the opposite of the spring season. But that's a beautiful time to reimagine how you communicate, to reimagine yourself as a person who is strong and communicates assertively and who thinks not like the trapped Eight of Swords, but the Eight of Swords person who is, who is very who perseveres is what I'm trying to say. The person who perseveres and thinks, what are some creative ways I can change this up? What if I start to move my body? What if I don't just sit here in defeat and say I'm tied up, but I start to say maybe I can get out of this on my own, and then realizes that you can. So this is a very spring energy communication, but at that opposite time of the year in autumn is when we can reimagine what it looks like to do something different in the spring. And we have these cycles within ourselves all the time. So when it comes to communicating your desires, your wants, and your needs, we can look at it from this energy bit of your energy centers. We can use tarot to ask ourselves some questions. I love tarot for asking questions. If you pull the Nine of Swords, for example, that's often called the nightmare card. There's the person in bed with like their hands and their face in their hands. I can't speak, their face in their hands. And there's all these swords that look like monster teeth kind of coming down on them. And this can be this, we pull this card and we'll often think like, oh, this is a nightmare situation. But what if you ask yourself a question based on that? What feels like a nightmare? What am I thinking is a nightmare? And then remember that you're thinking that it's a nightmare. And this is our thoughts changing the way we communicate and express ourselves, and then changing this on an energetic level, which comes from your solar plexus, your confidence, your heart center, your unconditional love, and then your throat energy center, which is not just speaking, but it's also hearing. It's also hearing what other people are saying and seeing why they're not being responsive to what you're communicating. Now, it's not your job to make people listen. It's your job to communicate your needs, and it's their job to learn how to listen to those needs, which might take time, probably will take time, but really understanding your worth, why you want what you want, and then communicating based on that assertively, not reactively, not with loads of emotion, like tied to this and already expecting arguments. That's not helpful. And that in terms of energy is not a very unconditionally loving energy to enter a conversation with. So also adjusting that, which takes working on yourself. Now, I will say here too, I am a Sagittarius sun. My husband is an Aries sun, so those are both fire signs. We both have an Aquarius moon, which means that we both react defensively and emotionally by thinking that we are better than everyone and that we are right and we are grandiose and we are going to be the right ones no matter what. And our rising signs in astrology are opposite. So your rising sign depicts how you see the world, really. It's like the world you live in. It's the colored glasses you see the world through. So ours are opposite. So we are both very fiery. We both react emotionally the same way, thinking that we're right, and we see the world in opposite directions. Now, I can tell you, being married to him now I've known him for, I think, 18 years now. If I'm doing the math, I think I've known him for 18 years. We've been married for 10, and it's not been easy. Communication is our number one hurdle. And all the things I presented you with today are the things that have made it better. It's understanding that it's not about convincing, it's about telling my needs, my desires, and telling them again and again and again, clearly and succinctly. But more important, knowing why that's my need, knowing why that's my value, and being confident in that. And also, when I don't get the response that I want, understanding energetically that maybe the other person just isn't ready to hear that thing. Maybe they truly don't understand it. Maybe it's making them feel defensive or like they aren't enough because you have this other need, or confused because maybe you're not the person they thought you were, something about you has changed, and that's confusing and it's scary. And that's that unconditional love piece. And it's that piece of hearing from the third energy center as well, hearing other people both energetically and literally hearing what they're saying to understand that. And that's how we begin to communicate more effectively. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because, again, we see it so much. We're doing our Magical Self-Care Book Club right now, and already I'm seeing from people, it's the time, it's telling people no, that gets in the way of self-care and really putting time in for yourself to do things. I hear it in our programs. Like, I don't know how to tell somebody that I want to do this if there's another money-making person in the house who's part of the financial decisions. I hear it all the time in that area, mostly around self-care, around spending money. I hear it. And then when somebody feels like they are ready to grow in a different way and want to learn astrology, they want to learn tarot, they want to understand the moon cycles, but they don't know how to tell their maybe very conservative spouse or partner or parents or friends or whoever that this is something that they're interested in. So how to communicate effectively really begins with you, your energy. If you're a tarot user, the Suit of Swords brings a lot of great questions to consider. If you look at yourself in the card that's being presented and ask yourself, how is this showing up in my life right now? How am I embodying this person who's trapped versus this person who can get out? How am I embodying this, like, I'm afraid, I feel like this is going to be a nightmare, versus it's a thought that I'm thinking and creating myself? How do I change that, right? To have something different. So we can use all of these tools that we use and change our communication for the better. I see a comment here: Aquarius sun, Aries moon, and Sag rising. Hubby is Gemini sun, Leo moon, Sag rising, and I get it. Yes, I will tell you that astrology and understanding our astrology is like the one thing that really changed the way my expectations around communication in my marriage in particular. That it led me to understand that, I'm not being heard necessarily, but that we literally are very opposite people. And so if I say the sky is blue and he says the sky is gray, that's just because we're very different. And then changing my expectation, and also, not looking for or starting arguments because I want to be acknowledged, right? That I'm correct. I want to be acknowledged that I'm being heard, rather than just saying, I've said what I've said. That's how I feel. That's what I need. And I'll say it 100 times if I have to. But not changing my expectation around how it will be received has been huge in my communication, and relieving myself of some of the pressure that I put on myself, right, by not having good boundaries to begin with, as happens with many women in particular. All right. Now, I know that there might be, I don't know if there's questions coming in the app or places like that. Due to my tech situation today, I am not following along in the app. I know that Christina, I'm sure, has been over there, and anybody else, but the replay will be posted in all of the places, and we will put this on the podcast feed. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, If you would rate and review our podcast, that's such a huge help for a small business. I can't even say what a huge help that is. It helps immensely in getting our message out to other people in the world. And remember, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any podcast player, really, you can create really awesome playlists to carry with you if there's something in particular that you are working on. So some suggestions today would be any of our swords podcasts. If you just search in our podcast player for episodes on the suit of swords in tarot, along with this one, there's also episodes on making time for yourself. All of these would be a really great playlist to create if you are looking to speak more confidently, understand why you want what you want, and once and for all, draw your line in the sand that you are worthy of your desires, and now you need to communicate them. So we have all these resources. All right, that is it for today's live podcast recording. This is Sarah of the Sisters Enchanted. Until next time, I hope that you have an enchanted rest of your day ahead.